Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. I'm Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics, and our guest today is Josh Goldfarb. He is currently the Director of Product Management at F5. Previously, Josh served as VP and CTO Emerging Technologies at FireEye and as Chief Security Officer for NPulse Technologies until its acquisition by FireEye. Prior to joining NPulse, Josh worked as an independent consultant, applying his analytical methodology to help enterprises build and enhance their network traffic analysis, security operations, and incident response capabilities to improve their information security postures. He has consulted and advised numerous clients in both the public and private sectors at strategic and tactical levels. Earlier in his career, Josh served as the Chief of Analysis for the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, USCERT, where he built from the ground up and subsequently ran the network, endpoint, and malware analysis forensic capabilities for USCERT. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to get started on your career path. This is something that a lot of our listeners are most interested in, is who is this person that you're talking to and how did they get to be where they are in this career that I'm so interested in? So tell me a little bit about your background and some of the places you've worked, how you got to be in the place you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for having me on the podcast today. I started out as a computer programmer when I went to college and was graduating college. I was lucky enough to be graduating college during the .com boom. In those years, it was hard to find programmers, so they were taking anybody who pretty much had a science degree or a math degree or an engineering degree. Even if you weren't a computer scientist, they would take you and train you on the job. I guess they were looking for people who had a good sense of logic and good understanding of logic. So I started as a computer programmer. I enjoyed it very much. After a few years, I was working in a place where they had a shortage in the security operations center. At that time, I really didn't understand what a security operations center was, what they did. I didn't know much about security at the time. And they asked me if I would be interested in taking a break from programming and trying out being an analyst in the SOC. And it sounded interesting. And at the time, I think security was already starting to be, this is about 20 years ago, security was already starting to be, pretty popular topic. It was gathering steam. It was gaining interest of people. It was a popular topic of conversation. I figured, you know what, let's give it a try. And that was it. I was hooked. I got into the SOC and I started to learn how to be an analyst and an incident responder. I very much enjoyed it. From there, I continued essentially converting from a contract employee at Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. to a government employee. I was one of the initial founding members of USCERT. We built up the team there and the capabilities. It was a good ride.
That's terrific. We actually had, I don't know if you're familiar, but we had a gentleman named Jeff Sanders. I hope I got his name right, from USCERT. and people there's a lot of people who don't know about USCERT and what it can bring their organization. And so if you're listening and you've never heard of it, go look it up. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just have a lot of respect for that organization and wanted to emphasize that with our listeners. So please continue.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great experience, really great training for the future. But we also, we were able to do a lot of things to help the state of security in the U.S. at the time. And I'm sure they've continued the work since then. After that, I decided I wanted to essentially be an independent consultant. After a few years in Homeland Security, I said I want to take my expertise in the SOC area and offer that as an independent consultant. And so I went to a number of security operations centers in government and also in finance in the New York area. After that, I began working in those SOCs and did that for a number of years, and that was quite good. Came to Israel, continued to do that. Came to Israel in 2012, continued to do that, and then essentially joined a security startup called NPulse in 2014. which was acquired by FireEye. Stayed with FireEye for a few years after the acquisition, went back to being an independent consultant, and then found my way to F5, where I've been for about a year and a half. That's at a very high level where my career has taken me. I think, my advice to people who want to get into the security field, because I know that there's a lot of interest in that, it helps to have one of two backgrounds, either a programming background or a systems administrator, firewall type of background. Those backgrounds are helpful because while they're not security in and of themselves, they show employers or prospective employers a very that a person has a good understanding of logic, that they have a good understanding of how systems and networks work. And that is essentially the fundamental knowledge, in my opinion, to being a decent security professional. If you can analyze data, if you can look at things logically, if you can figure out what attackers might do and how you might follow them throughout the network, throughout different endpoints and systems on the network, nowadays into the cloud, right, as organizations move to the cloud, or you understand deeply how systems and networks work, and you're able to really have that expertise and bring it to bear from a security perspective. Those two backgrounds, I think, give employers a really good basis. If they're looking for security talent, then that security talent just doesn't happen to be recruitable pre-trained if they need to train them on the job.
I agree with you 100%. I often will see people lamenting the idea that there are no entry-level security jobs. My response to that is always, yes, there are. It's called IT. Right?
That's correct.
Understanding how systems work helps you understand the security of those systems. Understanding how applications work and helps you understand the security of an application. So as you said, either development or operational background will give you a really good stepping stone into security. And I'm so glad to hear that you said that. So the other thing I wanted to ask you to clarify is most of our listeners will understand what a SOC is, but some of them are not familiar with what a SOC is or how it functions or what it brings to an organization. Can you go into that just a little more?
Sure. The acronym stands for Security Operations Center. Essentially, a SOC is usually staffed 24/7, not always, but usually, whether it's staffed internally or staffed via outsourcing to an MSSP or something similar. And basically, the Security Operations Center is charged with defending the organization from attack on a day-to-day basis, on an ongoing basis. So that involves collecting logs and other data from different systems around the enterprise and from cloud environments, et cetera. It involves analyzing that data, looking for evidence of intrusion. If intrusion is found, responding and containing that intrusion. That's essentially the work of the Security Operations Center. It's kind of the front lines, if you will, or the operations of the security team in any given enterprise.
Excellent. So some, like you said, some groups have this internally, and some people outsource it. But one of the things, and this is the reason that I reached out to you originally, is that sometimes it's hard for the business side to know, do we have good security people? Are the personnel that we have in those spots taking care of our security, are these the right professionals for us? And whether it's internal or a third party, I think that these points that you made in an article that you wrote are really applicable. So I wanted to go through some of them and kind of talk about it. So you wrote, by understanding what makes a great security practitioner, organizations can learn how to recruit and retain effective security practitioners. So what prompted you to write this article?
Yeah, so this was an interesting one. I get inspiration for my articles from a number of different things. Sometimes something will happen to me in the analog world, and I'm able to deduce or find a security lesson in it. Sometimes something happens actually practicing security, and I learn from it and I want to share it. In this particular case, I had actually been thinking back. The article prior to this one was how to spot an ineffective security practitioner. For those of in your audience who aren't aware, I do write a monthly for Security Week and for Dark Reading. And so the previous month's piece to this one had been how to spot an ineffective security practitioner, where I thought back on some of the people who I had found during the course of my career were not the greatest security practitioners, and I thought about why it is that they had so many challenges when trying to do their job, and that was the inspiration for that piece. And then when I posted it to social media, there was actually a very interesting discussion on Twitter where a couple of people said it would be great to frame this positively, and they actually requested the sort of inverse article, which is to how to spot an effective security practitioner. And so that's actually what drove this particular article. It was a request from a conversation that unfolded on Twitter, which is great. Anytime people read something and engage, comment on it, ask questions, or perhaps offer constructive feedback, that's always great. I guess a part of me is always concerned that when I write something, nobody ever reads it. So, when there's some commentary on it, it's always a good sign that at least some people have read it and
Sure.
taken a look at it and are thinking about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I love that how you put this, because you talked about the traits of a security practitioner that let you know that they're effective, and you start with selflessness. So why was that number one, and what does that mean?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, on the traits, this gets back to what we talked about earlier. Like you said, the entry-level job for security is either to be a developer or to be in IT, right? Because we talked about the fundamental skills that form the basis of a really good security professional, and that's a great way to get into the business. So along those lines, one of the character traits that makes for a really good security practitioner is to be selfless. And why is that? It reminds me, there was a picture with a funny caption that I saw maybe 25, 30 years ago. It appeared in the newspaper, but I think probably it was like the first meme before we had such a thing on the internet. And it showed a yellow line like you would find in the middle of a road going over a possum. Just the driver of the yellow line truck painted right over the roadkill and continued on down the road. And it said winner of the Not My Job Award.
Yes.
Right? that I'm sure you remember it, right? It was very famous to 25, 30 years ago. It was very, very famous. Everybody got a big kick out of it. It's just one of my favorite pictures with captions I've ever seen. But in security, there is no not my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to defending the organization, if it means that you have to roll up your sleeves and spend the entire day digging through a tedious log or trying to figure out how to get something configured when it's not working properly, or even doing something like governance, risk, and compliance, which is not as sexy, if you will, as security operations, but it's equally important, as is every aspect of security. Security practitioners need to be able to put their egos aside, roll up their sleeves, and do what the team needs them to do in order to move forward and make sure that the security posture of the organization continues to improve. And if a person is unable to do that and says, no, my job is A, B, and C, and I will only do A, B, and C, they'll never make it as a security practitioner. It just doesn't work.
Yep, for sure. And I see that all the time in the groups that I work with. I liked what you said about compliance. It's not the sexiest thing, and it's not fun a lot of times. But the groups that I work with that most successfully meet an adequate security stance for their organization, reach their compliance goals quickly, are the ones who don't, like you said, who are selfless in what they need to accomplish, including some of the things that maybe a lot of security professionals would like to say, oh, that's not my job, like documentation. Documentation is no fun at all. And a lot of people don't want to do it, but the ones who are best at security are also the ones who are willing to step up and meet the very boring documentation aspects of their compliance reviews. So here's another one that you talked about, which is a good listener. Tell me about being a good listener and how that translates to being good at security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think one of the challenges we as a security community struggle with is gaining trust and buy-in of stakeholders. And I don't mean within the security community. I mean within the business. It's very common, or I've heard many times in the course of my career, that the security team is the team of no. The security team always makes everything hard, right?
Right.
And that's not to say that we should just rubber stamp every single thing that the business wants to do and let them do whatever they want. That would be irresponsible. But it does mean that we need to find ways to gain confidence, build trust, build consensus, and that involves working with the business. And a big part of working with the business is understanding what drives them. What are their goals? What are their priorities? What are their objectives, right? Those things are going to be much, much different than ours will be on the security side.
Absolutely.
But if we can't convince the business that we're actually here to help them make more money, reach their goals more securely, and do so in a way that's very responsible, but doesn't sort of impede their ability to meet their objectives. If we can't convince them of that, we'll never be able to really win their buy-in and their support to help us move our security initiatives forward. So that skill to be able to talk to one or many people on the business side who have all kinds of different responsibilities, none of them having to do with security and all of them having to do with money and revenue and things like that. If we don't have the ability to listen to them and to really internalize what it is that they need to do and what's important to them, we have no hope in being able to translate that into security priorities and goals that we can move forward with.
Absolutely. And as you know, there are so many different ways to meet security responsibilities. And if you do know more about what the business is trying to accomplish and how they function, then choosing the right security controls to apply to the right areas is it just becomes so much easier, rather than a one size fits all in your security that you might try to apply if you didn't understand the business. So the next one is being introspective. In your article, you quoted Bertrand Russell in saying the fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world, the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt. I love that. Or I had to say that one because it's one of my favorite quotes. But tell me about being introspective and how it applies to security.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'll say modern society struggles with a little bit is understanding that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to do things that don't work out well. It's not okay to behave irresponsibly and make sort of callous decisions, but it is okay to make educated guesses, make a decision in the moment, a command decision, if you will, and go forward with that. And of course, they're not always right, okay? But one of the ways in which we improve or get better as a security professional, but also as a security community, is by understanding that if we make the wrong call and it works out badly, sometimes it blows up in your face, sometimes it costs you a couple of relationships inside the business, sometimes you lose a little bit of respect or a little bit of political capital, whatever the blowback or the ramifications are. If we have the ability, rather than pointing the finger and trying to blame others, if we have the ability to look inside and say, you know what, I really should have been more careful when making that decision, or I needed more data and I made assumptions that weren't correct, or I used intuition and emotion instead of using facts and data. If you have the ability to look inside and understand that, you're much more likely to learn from that, which of course means that the mistake isn't necessarily a waste of time if you learn from it. In fact, I would argue quite the opposite. A mistake that was made with the right intentions and using educated guesses and logic and data, even so, we sometimes make the wrong decisions. If we learn from it, it's actually, I would say, constructive and helpful in our careers, and certainly to the security posture of the organization, especially if we take your advice and document what we've learned, which we know is not the easiest thing to do.
That for sure, because then there's no running from it. We did this thing, it didn't work out. Here's what we learned from it. But those lessons learned are so important, not just to us, but to other people that are coming behind us who, there's a lot of shifting and changing throughout people's careers, and sometimes we'll get thrown into the deep end on, from my background, being in IT operations, where somebody else went through it but didn't tell us that, hey, this is what happened the last time we tried this. And so you end up repeating mistakes where allowing yourself to be in a slightly vulnerable position of documenting that is going to help the next person as well. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And kind of hand in hand with that is the next trait that you put down, which is credits others.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things when you have a talented security professional, and they're reporting to somebody who blames everybody else when things go wrong and takes credit when things go right, whether or not they were actually heavily involved in things going right, there are a few things in the workplace that are more frustrating than that. And I've certainly been on the receiving side of that. And I know many security professionals who have had bosses like that. But I think the flip side of that is that then when we get into a position of being in a leadership position, whether it be managerial leadership or whether it be just technical leadership and advising the organization on the right way forward, when things go right, we need to realize that it's a little cliche, but it kind of takes a village, right? So, for example, at F5, any initiative that we want to move forward involves cross-functional and cross-product group organizations, and there are a number of different stakeholders involved at every stage of the process, and they each help and contribute to moving the effort forward. And if you fail to credit them, right? I'm talking at F5, then you burn bridges, you lose confidence, you lose trust, and people are less likely to be excited about helping you the next time. All the more so when you're running a security program, right? If you credit others and you have that trait within yourselves, you'll build trust, you'll gain faith and the confidence of others. Which means that when you approach them and say candidly, look, we need to talk about this new business initiative that you have going. I have some security concerns. I think we can work it in, and we can help address those concerns without negatively affecting your projections for the year or your outcomes for the year. They're more likely to believe you rather than sort of casting you aside as somebody who just comes in and says one thing and then doesn't come back and say thank you. It doesn't give credit when it's time to give credit. So that's definitely something that's very important.
Absolutely. And I have had managers in previous jobs that have done that. All the blame goes outward and all the credit goes inward. And when you are reporting to someone like that, it's so disheartening. But what you don't realize is that the people above that person, they see through that. They know who's actually doing the work. I mean, they might get away with it for a little while, but eventually everybody does see where the work is actually coming from. And so by doing that, they're not actually doing themselves any favor. They're just upsetting the people around them. And so it's all the way around. It's a bad strategy to take. So you talked a little bit about being collaborative with other groups. To talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's frustrated me over the course of my career is when I see security leadership kind of butting heads or throwing elbows, so to speak, figuratively inside an organization. When you approach the table for a discussion with the business or with leadership or executives and you say, we're the security team and we know, and this is the way it has to be. Unfortunately, it isn't the way it has to be. And in many cases, I've seen that kind of headstrong approach backfire and the security team get reduced budget, walk with its tail between its legs as it goes out the door the other side. It's much more effective to work collaboratively with other areas of the business, including executives, leadership, the board, have them believe in you as a subject matter expert. Or in the team as a group of subject matter experts, have them believe that you're their partner in other words, a partner to the business to get the business to operate and profit more securely, and not necessarily there to kind of strong arm them into doing things that are going to make life difficult for them. It's a much more effective approach in my experience than kind of just bulldozing ahead without regard for that collaboration.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So that takes us directly to the next one, the next trait being communicative. This is not always easy for people in the security world. Communicating effectively, I think, is something that some groups might struggle with. What can you tell people about communication and how it increases security?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to think about it is to put yourself inside the head of a kind of a business leader who doesn't know much about security, maybe grew up, in years before security was something that people really talked about. I think it's different if you have a business leader who's kind of grown up in the last 10 or 20 years, but there are people who are probably getting closer to retirement that grew up at a time when security was something that was hardly ever spoken about, and maybe never spoken about. It was, we were in a much different world. A lot of it was offline and or mainframe systems, and all kinds of a different environment than we find ourselves in for the last, say, 15, 20 years. And so I think when you think about that type of a mindset, you have to imagine them asking the question, what does security actually do around here? What have they done for me lately? What are they doing for this organization, for this enterprise, for this business? What is it that they spend all of their days doing? Not necessarily asking from a cynical or a malicious place, but just a genuine lack of understanding of what the security team actually does and why they need X number of resources to do that, whether those resources be monetary, people, or otherwise. And if you think about that, then if you begin to communicate in terms that the business and others can understand, not overly using jargon, not overly technical, not overly in the weeds, but showing the value you're providing to the organization, showing the impact of the initiatives and efforts that the security team is moving forward, showing metrics that the business can understand, measurements or metrics that the business can internalize. By investing X amount of dollars, we saved Y amount of dollars in fraud loss, or Z amount of dollars in avoided security incidents and the like. And if you think about communicating in those terms, what are we doing? What effect is it having on the business? Why is it good for the business? Why should you care about it? Right? Then you really can build a lot more confidence in the security program, but also make it clear to people why they should work together collaboratively with security, because it's overall good for the business as a whole. And that's something that we as a community, I think, struggle sometimes to communicate that. And sometimes we even struggle to understand that we need to be able to communicate that. And so in my experience, it's very, very important to really to get that out there for people to see that are outside the security team.
Yeah, because I've seen groups sometimes when I go to an organization where you can tell that the security or IT team or both are feuding with the business side because they use more jargon. They increase the technical language, and they use language as a way to put up barriers rather than to create a common understanding. And so in those cases, they're obviously not on the same page in terms of how do we solve this common problem of security. And so using communication to create, as cliched as it sounds, rather create bridges rather than put up walls. But recognizing, and you can kind of see it if you recognize that jargon is coming into the language, if you recognize that people leave a conversation more upset than they entered the conversation, then communication is not truly happening. It's instead it's a war with words rather than truly communicating. So that brings us to the final trait that you had in your article, which is a security professional delivers.
That's right. Yep. I think I know I'm not alone when I say that we in the security field have seen our fair share of all talk and no delivery. I've unfortunately worked with a few people, luckily not by far the majority of them, but I've definitely worked with a few people during the course of my career who, they talk like a spiraling storm of words.
Yeah.
But in the end, when it comes time to actually follow through on even a portion of the words that they've spoken, it doesn't happen. And ultimately, it's great to say the right words when you're in a meeting. It's great to be able to understand topics and communicate them. It's great to be able to speak to the business. But you got to do more than just talk as a security professional. And a big part of being a security professional is rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and getting in there and making sure that the project or the effort gets across the finish line. Or if you're in an operational position, that day to day you give it your all, and make sure that you do what's right and best for the organization day in and day out. At the end of the day, it's about action and not about words. And the best security professionals I've known, they underpromise and overdeliver, right? They make sure that people understand what's expected of them and what they can produce, and they always go above and beyond and give the organization more than the organization was banking on. And that, and that's really what it is. At the end of the day, you got to know what to say, but you also have to follow it up with action.
Terrific. Well, this has been really helpful to me to hear from you. I'm sure that our listeners would like to hear more. We'll put a link in the podcast notes to your article on dark reading so that people can read your articles monthly and comment on it, give you feedback on that, and also dig deeper into the article that we covered today, the traits of a successful security professional. Sure, appreciate you coming and speaking with me today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us again here at the SecurityMetrics podcast. I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.